Hello, thanks for watching this review of Judges chapter 1. Judges chapter 1 picks up with a narrative that basically takes place before the end of the book of Joshua, talking about the conquering of the land and the driving out of the inhabitants that remained after the conquest that Joshua led. And we see in verse 1, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass, the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, "Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites?" And we see here that Judah is chosen to be the first one to go up against the remaining Canaanites that were in the land. Essentially, this whole chapter deals with the inability or the desire to not drive out the inhabitants of Canaan. So after the land had been conquered, there were still pockets of natives, of Canaanites and Perizzites and the like that were remaining in Canaan land. That was up to each individual tribe to drive out. And God had told these tribes that he would drive them out, but they would have to go and fight. And time again, throughout the first chapter of Judges chapter 1, we see the failure of the children of Israel in driving out the inhabitants of the land, the ones that had remained. At the end of each little section through chapter 1, we see here, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. The Canaanites, are talking about Manasseh, for instance, here in verse 28, did not utterly drive them out. Ephraim, but the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. And each of these tribes, they just did not have the desire to utterly destroy these natives. And so they were allowed to remain. And as such, throughout the history of the book of Judges, we read about how Israel, or these ones that had been left behind, eventually led Israel into the worship of false gods, Baal for one, how they intermarried and became intertwined, whereas God had commanded them to utterly drive them out and destroy them. And so this compromise that the children of Israel showed to these worldly, wicked people leads us throughout this book of Judges to know that, or to help us to understand that compromise with the world is never good. However, the book of Judges shows the mercy of God and the benevolence of God and how he delivers his people from times of trouble. The book of Judges covers about 350 years of Jewish history, of Israeli history, and the same pattern is followed throughout the entirety of the book. That Israel sins or makes a league with the world or with Canaanites, how Israel falls into sin and adultery, and how they become oppressed by their enemy, how they come into slavery perhaps by their enemy, how they cry out to God for repentance and forgiveness, and how God sends a judge or a hero to deliver his people from their oppressors. And it just is a continual cycle for 350 years, from the time that Joshua dies until the time that we see Samuel come on the scene at the end of the book. And there's just a continual cycle of sin and repentance, redemption, led by these judges that we will be studying. As I told the class this morning, the word judge here is not in the same vein that we would think a judge to be at a courtroom, but a judge in this book would be considered to be a hero, some type of national or local hero that would come and deliver the people from their oppressors. And so as we read through there, we're going to cover the 12 judges that served Israel at various times in the history during this 350-year period between Joshua and Samuel. A couple things I want to bring out, other than the failures of the children of Israel. We see here a little side note beginning in verse 12 about Caleb conquering his land that was given to him by an inheritance. He'd given or offered his daughter Achish as a tribute or as a reward for whoever could step up and drive out the people from his city of Hebron. And we see here that Othniel steps up to deliver the land for Caleb. And so we see here, even though Caleb is an old 85-year-old man at this point, he's still doing what he can in order to conquer his land. but yet these other tribes, they just lay down and allow compromise to set in with these natives that are still left behind. That's the crux of the book. We come here, I'm going to bring out here in Judges 1, 23 and 24, we see spies coming to the city of Bethel. I pointed out that in Genesis chapter 12, Genesis chapter 28, Genesis chapter 35, the place of Bethel being mentioned, it's first mentioned when Abraham is called of God, and God gives his covenant to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, and there is where Abraham builds an altar to the Lord as a memorial for the covenant that God made with Abraham. We see here that in Bethel, that is where Jacob wrestled with God, where Jacob slept on a pillow of stone here in Bethel, and that's in Genesis chapter 28. And then it's also mentioned in Genesis chapter 35. And so this city of Bethel is very important to the heritage of these children here, being that their ancestors were originally marking a meeting with God at this point. And so we see here the city of Bethel or Luz mentioned. And then the other thing I want to mention here is from from verse 27 through the rest of the chapter, again showing the inability or the desire to compromise with these inhabitants or these natives of Canaan, to compromise and to allow these natives to stay in Canaan land, which again, these natives represent the world, represent sin, represent false religion. And then we also get here to verse 34 of chapter 1, and how the Amorites even fight off and send the children of Dan, the Danites, out of their own territory. The enemy would not even allow, they fought back so hard that it drove the tribe of Dan out of their borders, and that the house of Joseph actually had to come in and help establish the territory for the tribe of Dan. But we see here a lot of compromise among the children of Israel with the Canaanites, the enemy, the false religions of the world here in chapter 1. And so that was basically the review today. We laid out some of the specifics, the generalities of the book of Judges and how it's going to play out through these next several months as we study through this. But most Bibles have an introduction page to the book, and so I would encourage you to read your introduction to the book of Judges and help you get a better understanding of what the book of Judges covers. So with that, I'm going to close. I thank you for watching. It seems like it's been quite a while since I've been able to record, but here we're back, and we should have one this week and next week as well for Judges chapter 2. Thank you.